Okay, so this is pretty big, actually. Microsoft has announced a quote-unquote strategic partnership. I'd quite like to see a non-strategic partnership, but a strategic partnership, a multi-year one with AMD, to basically power whatever's going to be happening with Xbox devices going forward. And I say that with some degree of uncertainty because reading the announcements here, it's not actually clear what the future is with Xbox devices, except to say that the future is Windows. The future is more PC-like, if you will. So it's a good job you are here this week, Alex, because there's a lot to get through on this, even though we're kind of like almost sifting through the tea leaves because it was somewhat deliberately vague here. But what's your key takeaway from the announcement?
Well, the key takeaways from the announcement that I have are that both there was an Xbox announcement from Microsoft as well as a very short one from AMD. That kind of just corroborated that. It would be strange if it was a one-way strategic partnership. A key takeaway from both of these is that they both describe multiple devices. They describe handheld, console, as well as cloud. All phrases brought up. That's the first takeaway. So they kind of like Xbox has been doing for the last, 3-4 years, maybe even longer, where they describe Xbox as being a multi-device thing, including cloud. So that seems to continue on in that. So we will see multiple different types of hardware there. They also mentioned the new ROG Ally Xbox thing. That was also included as part of this discussion from AMD's perspective. And the second thing that I would think was a really big deal was the description of backwards compatibility being as a part of that. This is another sifting through the tea leaves thing, though, because they didn't describe what it meant. They just said backwards compatibility as part of it. I don't know if that means hardware emulation, software emulation, if it means you can play stuff over the cloud that are old games. Does it have to do, can you use your discs from your previous Xbox consoles? None of that is obviously discussed here, so we're kind of left wondering. But I think it's positive if you're an Xbox player that in spite of the uncertainty that you might have had in the last maybe 2 years, that you at least know somehow backwards compatibility is going to be covered by whatever future Xbox devices come out. But as to what that means, I still have no idea.
Okay, fair enough. Oliver, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot more questions than answers kind of from this announcement, in part because I kind of expected all these things to be true and have expected all these things to be true for quite a while. One question that I think is quite pertinent is, when is this launching? So historically, Microsoft has waited about a year between their substantial announcements regarding their next-gen consoles before they've released them. So like Series X was announced at Project Scarlet at E3 2019. One X was announced as Project Scorpion at E3 2016, I believe. Those were more substantial reveals than this. This is just like a hardware partnership, but still, you kind of wonder, is this a 2026 console? Is this a 2027 console? I know in the Microsoft leaks, they were penciling in sometime around 2028. Obviously, that was in 2022, though a lot can change. So I think that's an interesting question. Another key question is, how custom is the next-gen Xbox? Is it going to basically be a set of custom SoCs with shared graphics and CPU IP, right? And some maybe custom hardware features like a decompression engine, things like that? Or is it going to be more of a set of discrete CPUs and GPUs, or is it going to be somewhere in between, right? That kind of depends. You'd presume something UDNA based, maybe Zen 5. Outside of that shared architecture, though, exactly what form will that take across the broad spectrum of devices that Microsoft is shipping to? So that's one question. Another question is, how far do they try to homogenize this approach with their existing Windows PCs? Like, Microsoft has Xbox PCs famously. That came out in the Gears of War Remastered announcement, and that's a phrase they've been using since in their announcements at the Xbox Game Showcase. But like, how much of this feature set is going to be filmed on Xbox PCs? Because presumably you look at devices like the ROG Ally, is that an Xbox? I mean, I know they said it's an Xbox, but is that more of an Xbox PC, or is that an Xbox, or what is it going to be? Because if you look at this, they're going to have some backwards compatibility functionality, like Alex mentioned. I presume they're going to end up with some software features or optimizations that end up only on the Xbox quote-unquote consoles, right? Like I would assume they'd be distributing pre-compiled shaders. I would assume they would have some solution for suspend resume. I would assume they would have default graphics settings, at least for every game. I mean, these kinds of things seem like the bare minimum to me to sort of match the Xbox functionalities that exist today. So I wonder exactly how far they'll go with those features. But I'd also presume on the other end that there would be some kind of Windows, Xbox front end, like we saw demoed on the ROG Ally, available to all Windows PCs. Maybe not immediately, but certainly in the fullness of time. So exactly, how do you differentiate these two similar things, which is like an Xbox PC with potentially, if you want it, an Xbox front end interface, right? Versus this Xbox, which has like, it's running Series X games, One X games that's doing all this stuff in the background. It has these optimizations. How do they differentiate those? I think that's one key question. But yeah, I think there's some interesting marketplace questions about this. Like they're the kinds of questions that I think we've been asking for a while with these kinds of efforts. Are people willing to go back and accept potentially a little bit of a rougher experience in order to have this expanded flexibility with Steam, with Epic's Game Store, with more PC access, with titles on PC that you might not get on consoles like Star Citizen, like early access titles, things like this. But on the flip side, of course, you're completely giving up the traditional console exclusive as far as I see it, right? Sony and Nintendo have a lot of those. I don't know if there's a ton of interest that was announced here, except for a couple of things that Lisa Su said that I thought were interesting. She said that it's a full roadmap of gaming optimized chips combining the power of Ryzen and Radeon, which to me maybe leans more towards that SoC type design where you might have, let's say, just spitballing here, like a Series S-like chip, a Series X-like chip, and then a high-end chip, right? An ultra-high-end chip that is a larger chip, and it could reach price points that are even in excess of the PS5 Pro. I could certainly see that. But yeah, ultimately, that's a lot of hot air just to say that not a whole lot was announced, not a whole lot of interest was announced. But if you read exactly what people like Lisa Su said, exactly what Sarah Bond said, I think you can start to see this is pretty clearly a Windows-based device. Probably there's some SoCs involved from AMD, and probably there's some level of software features that are going to try to match the functionality of the Xbox console. How well those work, we're going to have to see. But I don't think they're going to try to just throw you into Windows with a front end and call it a day. I think they are going to try to develop some kind of customized experience that actually works for console-like PC gaming.
Right, interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of sort of specific questions I have, like, Sarah Bond was talking about co-engineering silicon with AMD while showing the Xbox logo stamped onto the Z2 Extreme processor, where what involvement did Microsoft have with that? I mean, as far as we're aware, nothing. Maybe it's just a slightly customized spin. It might just be the case that the Z2 Extreme AI version, which has the NPU active, is exclusive to Microsoft. Who knows? But this co-engineering thing, maybe that description is possibly a bit flowery for what actually happened there. But, is that confirmation that we are actually going to have backwards compatibility on the ROG Ally X, because they're saying it's an Xbox chip because they've added an Xbox logo to it, which again raises questions about, well, how is a chip like that going to run Xbox Series console games on it? I don't know is the short answer. Is it included in this next generation lineup? We just don't know. But, they specifically showed it. Kind of weird. Basically, I actually found the Lisa Su announcement to be slightly more interesting, with this particular comment about designing a full roadmap of gaming optimized chips combining the power of Ryzen and Radeon for consoles, handhelds, PCs, and the cloud. And we're doing it all with backwards compatibility, so gamers can access their favorite titles across platforms. Well, backwards compatibility, I expect that to be a mixture of hardware and software. If we're talking about like OG Xbox, I think that's a full software emulator on the Xbox consoles. 360 does have some hardware backwards compatibility built into the GPUs, specifically if memory serves texture formats that were bespoke to the Xbox 360. But, again, I suspect that could be software engineered to work. Beyond that, of course, Series X and S have full backwards compatibility with Xbox One, similar to what's happening on PlayStation. So that's kind of already baked into the silicon, so to speak. This concept, though, of gaming optimized chips. So at the moment, if we look at sort of what AMD do with their CPUs, they have the Ryzen lineup, which is typically chiplet based. And then they have the APU lineup, which stretches across handheld, across PC, and across laptops. They have those APUs like the Z2 Extreme, which is basically a Strix point processor that is also being used for mini PCs, stuff like that, laptops. So I wonder if Microsoft is just kind of integrating their way into that kind of APU side of the business. It could be more, of course. It could be the fact that there's the idea, rather, that there are going to be bespoke combinations of Ryzen processors and Radeon discrete graphics that could be supported more directly. Who knows? It's kind of raising a lot more questions than answers. But I've got an interesting question here, which is to say that I think we can basically say that the idea of the console as a high-volume device probably is going to start to wane, if not sort of outright decline going forward. But maybe Microsoft is eyeing a different kind of business. The market for pre-built PCs, pre-built gaming PCs is actually pretty huge. And of course, those PCs are actually, relatively very, very expensive to buy. Meanwhile, the console philosophy, they're producing, this is a PlayStation 5,
Right.
a full APU one side, memory on the other side, one board, which can basically, match an entry-level PC at this point. The Pro takes that up another level. I consider a possibility here where Microsoft may have a sort of reference design along those parts, and it's going to be the likes of Dell, Alienware, Lenovo, Asus, probably MSI, that are able to make their own range of PCs that can either be PCs or can be Xbox PCs. And this is just going to be a manna from heaven to AMD, because it's potentially going to see a lot more quote-unquote pre-built PCs shipping with AMD silicon rather than NVIDIA discrete GPUs. So maybe there's just kind of like a strategic realignment of a new entry in the PC market, bearing in mind that Microsoft have essentially lost the dedicated console market at this point. And it's a strategy that has a lot of merits, right? Because the size of the PC market is kind of huge, right? It almost dwarfs what the consoles are generally doing on a sort of per platform basis. So there's a lot of possibilities here. It is just slightly sort of, I guess it is a very, very early announcement. I suspect that we're probably not going to see anything beyond the ROG Ally X this year. Next year, I still find it highly unlikely that they're going to be spinning up custom silicon this quickly, unless there's some outstanding design that they can adapt quickly. I still think 2027 is probably going to be the more likely target for this initiative. Not just from the hardware perspective, but Alex, the amount of work that Microsoft has to do on Windows goes far beyond what we saw with the ROG Ally X, right?
Yeah, especially now if there's going to be multiple devices, potentially with different shader layouts, maybe all based upon the same core architecture. But there could be actual differences in there that would require different shaders per each box, per each revision of whatever the development environment was that it was shipped in. So Microsoft has to figure out a lot of things on the PC graphics side to make this at all possible, and also make it somehow layered in with the fact that AMD is not the only people providing graphics technology nowadays. DirectX is a standard which many GPUs can be designed around. You've got obviously your Intel and NVIDIA, which are the big players, but there's also Chinese firms now that are making GPUs that are DirectX compatible and things like that. It's a spec that can be made too. And as a result of that, I think whatever endeavor this has to be, if it is going to be more open and PC-like, it's going to have to mean a fundamental change and advancement of DirectX in a direction where it is, let's just say, a lot more intuitively thought out than it was in 2015 when DirectX 12 kind of came about. It didn't have any scaling legs into the future for a lot of its aspects and was kind of being towed behind other industry leaders, specifically NVIDIA. In this case, I think whatever they're going to be doing with these next generation Xboxes, it's going to have to be something, even though AMD is the strategic partner here, whatever massive changes they are making to Windows as well as to DirectX to make this possible, they kind of have to be brought broadly to the other IHVs, NVIDIA and Intel. Otherwise, you would have a strange bifurcation in the PC ecosystem where you get the only intended kind of more streamlined experience if you buy an AMD chip. I don't think Microsoft has done that in the past. The 90s slightly with Intel, but times have changed since then. So I'd be very curious to see what this at all means for the future of DirectX, as well as just basic stuff when you get into a game. Like on an Xbox console, a lot of the static world geometry is baked offline into a BVH that is ray traced against and just loaded into memory. While on PC, you would have different BVH formats depending upon Intel, NVIDIA, or AMD. You couldn't necessarily take that from a backwards compatibility perspective and expect it to work on other vendors' hardware. So this would be only backwards compatibility for AMD, or what do they mean by backwards compatibility? There's, like Oliver said, there's so many more questions that are brought up by this announcement. And they've got enough time, I guess, to figure these things out. But it would help to know at some point in time what the heck all this means, because I still have no clue.
Well, so you're suggesting a concept of a PC as it is now and an Xbox PC, which would be some kind of fork, if you like.
Yeah.
And there's got to be cross compatibility between the two. Otherwise, there's no point, surely.
I think in Microsoft's terminology, it's even the Xbox PC is just the PC as we know it today, and then the Xbox is the new console-like PC platform. I think that's more their terminology, but it's very confusing to me, to be honest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, the concept of allying Xbox directly with Windows does kind of address the question that a lot of people have, which is to say that if you're running other people's stores on your hardware, how are you going to make money? And the answer is that they don't care where you buy your games from, as long as you buy their games. And the concept of, this is the other thing which I find quite interesting, the concept of the platform holder sponsoring the hardware. So and then clawing back that money from game sales. I'm not sure that model is a good fit for what's being suggested here, especially unless the console is going to sell tens of millions of units, which it doesn't sound like that's the focus anymore. So, I think, that maybe Microsoft is going to be relying on, third parties, OEMs, and a competitive marketplace to actually make these devices affordable, possibly. Certainly an interesting strategy, and certainly a confusing one, because the amount of questions we've had about this from supporters is, I think people don't really know what Microsoft is up to, apart from the fact that it's all Windows now. Anyway, this question from Alan. Hi, chaps. Xbox CEO Sarah Bond said AMD will be powering the next generation of Xbox in your living room and in your hands. The thing is, who is the Gen 10 Xbox aimed at? Who is going to spend the likely £600 on a Gen 10 Xbox? People with PS5s will buy a PS6. People with PCs will upgrade their PC. And Switch 2 owners will just play play Xbox games on their Switch 2. The Xbox messaging seems to be all over the place, and surely all credibility has evaporated given how Microsoft has hollowed out the Xbox brand. What does it even stand for anymore? I think it's pretty obvious what it stands for. It stands for great games, and they don't really seem to be that bothered about where you play them, right, as long as you're playing Xbox games. And that's kind of happened through acquisition, because they've acquired a lot of multi-platform developers. And just from the fact that, let's be honest, Sony have done a much better job of selling their current generation and last generation consoles, which have basically boxed Microsoft into this position. As to who the Gen 10 Xbox is going to be aimed at, those people that want an Xbox, and there are still, a bunch of people out there who are deeply invested in the ecosystem, and who knows what the quality of games may well bring other people back to the fold or into the fold. But Microsoft is effectively doing the ultimate hedge here by providing options for effectively all parts of the market. But I agree. It certainly is for people who are kind of sort of wedded to the existing way of doing things. It's definitely interesting, definitely confusing, but it's certainly interesting in the perspective that it is something new and different. This one from Diehard X86. Hello. With the Xbox AMD hardware partnership renewed and Sarah Bond's statements that they are focusing on making Windows the de facto gaming platform on any device form factor, I've seen many outlets comment that Windows will be what Xbox is using to run natively. I don't actually think this is exactly true, and rather an Xbox OS partition next to a Windows partition on the SSD is more likely due to licensing and store monetization. Your thoughts? And thanks for the great work as always. I don't know what you think, Oliver, but I think it is the fact that Windows is going to be the de facto system going forward, but the whole Xbox OS partition could be there for backwards compatibility.
Yeah, I really do think that the primary focus here is on Windows. There's a big emphasis on Windows. If you read Sarah Bond's comments or listen to Sarah Bond's comments, she says specifically that she wants to ensure that Windows is the best platform for gaming immediately after she describes the Xbox next generation plans. So she's not coming out and saying next gen Xbox is on Windows, but she is saying next gen Xbox is great. We have this partnership with AMD. It's going to be terrific. You're going to love it. Also, we're making sure that Windows is the best platform for gaming. So I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, she's not saying it 100%, but I think it's pretty obvious what she's saying. Every indication has been that it's a Windows device for a long time. I'm sure if you go back to the After X 6 months ago or a year ago, we've basically been saying something quite similar throughout that period. I would presume that for backwards compatible games, they'll be running that obviously in a virtual machine of some kind. They'll have maybe some kind of Xbox OS. Partition, sure, something going on there. Maybe they'll just be booting the games. I presume they probably just be booting the games from the main interface, something like that. Yeah. But they might have some accommodation where you can just basically browse the traditional Xbox interface. That's also a possibility. I'm not sure exactly how they'll pursue that.
I think it'll be a unified front end, and it'll just boot Xbox games within the Xbox VM. I don't know what you think about that, Alex.
That seems more reasonable. Just from a usability perspective, I don't think Microsoft would want to have like the ideal of like a dual booting system that people have to like care about these things. Rather, it'll be transparent, much like it was very transparent when you would boot an Xbox 360 game on an Xbox One or Xbox Series S, right? It doesn't feel that different than booting a normal game. I think that's how they would do it, but I still don't understand what the store integration looks like exactly, especially since they touted Epic, GOG, and Steam. And, GOG, like they're going to have DRM free games on your Xbox. What does that mean?
Means it's a PC.
Yeah.
Other questions. This one from Bassers. The very best of afternoons to you, gents! ! Whilst there was nothing quote-unquote new in Sarah Bond's Xbox hardware presentation, could the fact this took place at all be indicative of a sooner rather than later move to the next generation for Microsoft? Or does this potentially represent more of a shift to more frequent iterative hardware, steering the ship away from generations altogether? I think logistically, moving to next generation quickly is going to be difficult because there's a lot of work to be done both on the software and hardware side. And I kind of think you're probably right on the second point. It probably does potentially represent more of a shift to more frequent iterative hardware, steering the ship away from generations altogether, because that is effectively what PC is. It actually takes something quite dramatic to represent something that is a generational leap on PC these days. I mean, what was the last time we saw that? I don't know, Alex. Turing, maybe? DirectX
Yeah.
12 Ultimate?
Yeah, that was really it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what you think. You think that's the way forward? Basically, we've got this one last generation, and then we're going to just more closely integrate with PC.
Well, I don't know how it works because we haven't seen it before. The only analog that I kind of see is the way Apple produces its new M series of processors, where they've been iterating ever since they switched over to their own in-house silicon, and where the iterations, sometimes they're larger, sometimes they're smaller, but they keep adding new like feature sets and stuff like that more rapidly, arguably, than DirectX has in the last couple of years. So that would be really interesting, and that would bring about new innovations much more rapidly. And I would think that'd be fantastic if it wasn't a static, we keep this high-end Xbox the same for 7 years thing. I would find it utterly fantastic, actually, if it switched more to like a PC style model. But I don't know how consumers would react to the idea that their Xbox high end thing is actually only high end for about a year and a half or something like that. People
Right.
get really, really upset that they don't have the best thing ever. But I don't know. That would be cool though.
I don't know, though, if Microsoft is essentially moving the focus to Windows. They're basically going into competition with NVIDIA at that point, who have no qualms whatsoever about pushing state-of-the-art technologies.
Absolutely none. And they don't mind leaving behind their older users in terms of feature set. If you had a Pascal GPU right now, like Turing is like so much better, right? And then Ampere is better than that, etc. It's a very different mindset.
What do you think about that, Oliver?
I mean, I kind of suspect that they at least want to signal that they're going to be there in next generation faster than Sony. I think Sony is in the enviable position of having a really successful hardware platform. And so the best you see out of Sony is like some cryptic statements. Like I think last week they had some investor conference. They basically said, we're thinking about the next generation quite strongly. And Microsoft is out here saying next gen Xbox, AMD, this and that, all these big announcements, big press cycle. It's a totally different approach. Microsoft also does tend to announce hardware a little bit earlier than Sony, especially when things haven't been going well. Like if you go back to the last generation, Project Scorpio was announced prior to the PS4 Pro, and I think it was even rumored somewhat before that, even before E3 2016. And even though it was announced before the PS4 Pro, it released a year later. So they were very keen to say, we're moving on from Xbox One. Don't you worry, enthusiast gamers. We have a product for you. It's got 6 teraflops of compute. It's super fast. It's compatible with all your existing accessories. Also, we're discontinuing Connect. It was kind of a similar time frame. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But yeah, I think in general I would not read too much into this announcement. Like I said, it's not a firm announcement. It's not as firm as their previous kind of E3 oriented hardware announcements where they did make some claims. Like if you go back to the Project Scarlet announcement, they were talking about specifics as detailed as saying it's a Zen 2 CPU design, right? They weren't telling you it's a Series X. They certainly weren't telling you it's a Series S, but they were telling you elements of that hardware design. So I wouldn't read into it too much. The other thing is like, I guess there's some question about what these chips were intended for. If these R&D SoCs, you'd presume maybe at some point these were chips that in 2023 or 2022 were possibly intended for a more full-throated Xbox next generation console, and then possibly were basically, adapted would be the wrong word, but used for this Xbox kind of PC initiative. That's one possibility. But even still, that would kind of push you still towards that 2027, 2028 timeframe, potentially, probably 2027, just because that was in Microsoft's initial brief in 2022. And it would make probably the most sense if they were to stick to roughly that timeline, I would think.
Okay. Last question from Bespoke ! Bespoke Premium, Bespokeist Premium supporter. Did Xbox just cannibalize any potential future sales for this ROG Xbox Ally by announcing next gen already? I'd love to have been a fly on the wall when they made that very strange decision. I get that the ROG is actually a PC and this quote unquote next gen is presumably an actual Xbox, but they are still marketing the ROG as it is an Xbox. Don't they want to sell at least a couple of ROGs before announcing that if something even better is just around the corner. Xbox, double exclamation point. Go home, you're drunk, exclamation point. Well, this is kind of like what we were talking about in terms of confusion, right? I think this is probably a couple of years down the road, and your Xbox Ally that you can buy this holiday season is probably going to be, perfectly fine. Won't have any particular competition. The timing of the announcement is certainly odd. I'm not quite sure why they needed to make any announcement at all at this point, to be honest. I mean, why? It's kind of curious, right?
Yeah.
Just because maybe it was some sort of response to the feedback about the Ally X, which is that you've made an Xbox that doesn't play Xbox games, and the Sarah Bond presentation showing the Z2 Extreme with an Xbox logo on it kind of seemed to be suggestive that it will. I don't know. It's very, very odd. But I'm sure there's going to be much more detail emerging in due course, as and when Microsoft sees fit. And we got some more supporter questions about this arrangement coming up later.